Today we're going to have a chat about pillar number 3 of successful trapping, and that's all about lures. Now I'm going to have to apologise in advance. We're having a few issues at the moment, and it's the joy of being in Pukaha. We've got a lot of bird song drowning out the mic, but anyway, we'll carry on. Right then, so lures. I mean, what is a lure in a trap? It's there purely to encourage interaction with your control method. That's what it is, pure and simple. And so often when I talk with groups, they go, "Hey John, what's the best lure for stoats?" or "What's the best bait for rats?" And you know what? The bad news is there is no best bait really. A lot of the time we like to think there is, but the strength of a lure is in the fact that you change it. Simple as that. A best bait, or one that you catch the most with, will only be good to a point if you keep using it day in, day out. And unfortunately with a lot of our trapping, it's what we're doing. The strength of our lures is when we change it. And why is that? It's because when you change it, you encourage interaction. You create interest in something. And often I find when I change a lure in my traps, suddenly I get a spike in captures. And those animals were always going past my traps. But I like to call them O moments, and that's a good O moment. When there's a stoat going past your dock trap and it smells something different, it goes, "Oh, I'm going to check that out." Whereas it's been used to going past day in, day out because you've been using the same bait all the time. So change it up is the most important message when it comes to using lures. When it comes to lures, one of the most common ones we use in our trapping is a food-based lure, but it's not the only lure you can use. And what happens if your predators that you're trying to catch aren't hungry? If they're not hungry, they're a lot less likely to interact with your trap when it's a food-based lure. So you really need to think about those sorts of things. So we can have scent-based lures, we can have visual lures, we can have food-based lures, we can have sex pheromone type lures. Lots of different lures you can use. And for me with my trapping, I like to change it up, and I like to use my lures to reflect what's going on in my whenua and in the life cycle once again of the animals that I'm targeting. Keep them at the centre of the wheel, don't forget that. So often with our trapping, I think we are inclined to try and be clean and sanitised and a little bit too efficient. And you know what, sometimes it's not the best way. You know, we're doing what we want to do, not necessarily what's most attractive to our predators. So in my traps, what I'm trying to do is recreate a crime scene. I want in my trap to look like something has died there or something got killed there, but there's still something left over that a hungry predator might want to eat. Because don't forget that our predators aren't just predators. In every situation, they're also opportunist feeders. They need to eat regularly, and if they haven't made a kill, then they're going to look for other methods to feed themselves. And that's what our trap is all about. So for apex predators, for me, I kind of like to think of the 3 Bs. And you're probably getting a feel for the fact that I've got all these little sayings, but I like the 3 Bs. Big bloody baits. I want stuff that drips and stuff that oozes and stuff that looks like it was killed or died very recently, and stuff that's got scent just coming out of it. I want something that's going to yell at the predator, "Come and eat me." I don't want to be trying to catch a teenager in McDonald's with Weet-Bix. And sometimes with our trapping, that's what we're doing. We want to be giving our predators hamburgers. You know, we want to give them what they want. And another little saying I like to use is, you can't beat what they eat. Recreate natural. Give them what they like the most, give them what they're used to eating, and then present it in a way that looks really, really attractive. More than any other aspect of my trapping, when it comes to luring, there are real subtleties in the way that you use lures. And you can overlure and you can underlure. And there's no necessarily right answer, but as a trapper, as you get experience, you will learn the difference. But don't ever forget that their senses are far more sensitive than ours. Their sense of smell is just hundreds of times better than ours. So what we think might be powerful might be completely overwhelming for a predator. So you want to call out to them, "Come and eat me," but you don't want to damage their senses when they get closer to the trap. We want them to be interested and keep that interest. You don't want to give them the reward without going into the trap as far as what they're doing and interacting with your lure, if that makes sense. So what does that look like? Well, one of the things I love doing is pre-feeding. And we hear about pre-feeding a lot with possums and often with rats, but I pre-feed my predators as well. And often if I'm using a large chunk of bloody dripping meat inside the trap, I will also do small fingernail sizes outside the trap and just inside the trap. So I'm desensitizing the animal to my control method before it hits the trap plate. The trick with pre-feeding, once again, is to be subtle. You want to encourage interest, but you don't want to compete with your bait. You don't want to feed them so much outside the trap that they don't need to go inside. So everything you do with your luring, you really need to think about the how and the why, and get inside their head and look at it from their perspective with whatever you're doing. Combinations of bait is a really common thing as well. You might combine a visual lure with a scent-based lure, and the most common that we all use is egg and meat in a dock trap. Works really, really well. But never stop thinking as a predator hunter about every little thing you're doing. So puncture your egg to create more scent, and use a bigger piece of meat so it doesn't dry out as quickly, so that scent keeps going for longer. And then pre-feed a little bit. Get a piece of meat with some blood and wipe it inside your dock trap to create a blood scent trail that the animal is going to be laser beamed into the entrance on. So do all those little things with lures that make the biggest difference. And you know, the difference is seconds on a trap line, but the difference in results can be twice as good. Always remember to consider the species you're targeting and the way they are as well. And what do I mean by that? Look, every species works and operates differently in an environment. A really good example of that is the difference between ferrets and stoats. If you look at what we're doing in New Zealand, and we're going to talk more on this, but most people are trying to catch a ferret as though it's a big stoat, whereas they're totally different species. They operate differently in the environment. Ferrets are incredibly scent driven, particularly on ground scent, and you watch them, they will track ground scent all the time. When they get close, they'll come in on the wind. Stoats are more 50-50 wind and ground, but they're also very visual as well. Feral cats are very visual, but they will also track a little bit as well. So think about the way that the targeted species operates and structure your luring regime accordingly to maximize the gains from that. So let's have a chat about some hot tips for luring and what I've found works really, really well. Let's talk about stoats. You cannot beat rabbit or hare for me with stoats. Make sure the skin is attached. Remember, we're recreating natural here, and rabbits don't get skinned in the wild. There's bits of fur and skin and blood and meat everywhere in a crime scene. So leave skin on your rabbit if you can, and make it big. So stoats love rabbit and hare. But if you want to try something different, how about trying something with a bit of fat in it going into winter when they're trying to pack on some calories and put on condition? I do really, really well on stoats with venison, big chunks of venison. Whenever I swap venison into a regime that has been using rabbit or something else for stoats, we often get a spike in captures. I know you can't all get access to venison, and some of you would be horrified at the thought of using it, but it's really effective for stoats. For rats, crunchy peanut butter, it's the go-to. But what I do sometimes, if I can't catch a rat in a trap with crunchy peanut butter, what I like to do is break a bit of walnut, and I like to stick that in the bait cup using the peanut butter as glue. Every time I do that on rats, I do better. Works really, really well. For feral cats, for me, rabbit and hare, once again, are definitely the most successful. But if I'm not having any success with rabbit or hare, quite often what I'll do is I'll buy a bag of pilchards from a bait shop, and I'll put a pilchard in each of my traps, just as something different. Sardines as well, not the ones in the tomato sauce, can also be a really good thing. I've never done that well with fish as a standard baiting regime for apex predators. Others have, but there's definitely some science that shows that they're attracted to omega-3. So give it a try, pulse it in, pulse it out. Another thing that I want to touch on briefly is that when you're working as part of a team or in a group, often you're working to a plan and a regime. So rather than just hearing all off over the countryside, throwing different lures in and trying them, make sure that you're talking to your team members or to your project manager, and that what you're doing is being done in a coordinated way. One of the things we quite often do in projects is we have some mobile traps where people can try different lures in a few traps rather than changing out the whole structure if they want to see what works in their area. And sometimes what works really well is putting a trail camera on those traps to watch the animals interacting with your traps and with those different lures. A lot of fun. So just to recap, the key thing with lures particularly is that you don't use the same lure all the time. You change it up. You're there to encourage interest and recreate natural. Remember that crime scene. That's what you want in a trap for an apex predator. Think about the 3 B's. Think about pre-feeding and luring and scenting your traps out, and remember not to over-scent traps.